Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name is Caspar, your host, and together I'm with Russell, my co-host, as always. Russell, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. I'm in Munich today, and I'm in a nice hotel around the Ostbahnhof, looking over Munich. It's a beautiful sight. The weather outside is miserable, so I think I'll stay here for the evening.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
And I heard that you're on the way to a city with M as well. So,
no, I'm in the city with the M. I'm in Madrid right now.
But you're already there. Okay, nice.
Yeah. But I'm actually on my way back. So I'm moving back to home actually after 4 days of a go-to-market summit of the company that I work for, Salonis. So we had a very nice, let's say 500 people in the go-to-market organization for EMEA and Asia that came together. For a lot of talking, actually. But it was really good. So I'm happy to go home as well, to be very honest.
Super.
So if you have any background noise, I'm on the airport, but we'll be fine. Now, Russell, we don't have a guest today. Let's start with that. So it's just you and me, like all days when we started. And I have a reason for that as well, because I just want to bounce something off you. And it might be of interest to our listeners as well. We all know that when you do a BPM project, sooner or later, you need to talk about the process hierarchy. How do you structure your process repository and how do you go about that? And in many cases, organizations ask for best practice frameworks. Could be SAP, it could be Deloitte, or maybe Oracle has one, KPMG has one, APQC is there. And there's one thing in particular that is bugging me a little bit with that. And it's one of my pet peeves, and I encounter it really literally at every customer that I have. And I have to be also very honest, it's very often when they're going through an S4 transformation. And here's the thing, and then I'm gonna be silent for a second and get your opinion on it. When you look at the standard framework that SAP delivers with its S4HANA system, so the S4HANA best practice framework, it's very nicely structured, L1, L2, L3, and so on. And then when you look to L1, it is a mix of purely functionally labeled domains, manage HR, manage IT. So you could also say HR and IT. And then there is procure to pay and order to cash and record to report and hire to retire. And those are end-to-end labels. They're not functional domain labels. And if you go to level 2, it's always the next level of a functional decomposed structure. And I'm just laying awake at night in bed thinking, why do they do that? And of course, I should not ask you why they do that, but I would just want to know from you, did you run into that? And then let's go into why I think it might not be the best idea and what we can do about it. So
good.
Hit me.
Well, to be honest, it also bugs me. And typically, when you come to a customer, they've already got something in place. They've Googled, they've gone around, they bought something out of the depths of their archives, and they said, we started drafting something, and this is what we've come up with. And fundamentally, also in the German language term, they always have this you could translate it as well, you see it as well. It's like the Kernprozesse, the main processes, the supporting processes, and the management processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally I'm going, so when do you say this is management? And when do you say this is supporting? So for example, then sometimes you're going down this rabbit hole where they try to pre-structure their map, and then they have procurement down under supporting. And I'm going, well, what why is that supporting? That's you're a retailer, or you fundamentally, your business model is based on you buying raw materials and making products out of them. So
absolutely.
Then you start into this discussion. I try to trigger this, and going into this discussion. So what is is this less value, less worth, and all the management wants at the top. So there's all these connotations and discussions around where do you place it and how do you place it, where it says this is not really adding to the value of understanding the process architecture. So that's one thing that also bugs me, that people try to have one entry map, and it's got to cover everything, and they're trying to already give things more value than others. And I, coming from a pure play process architecture, says why is there this differentiation? A process is a process, yeah. And if you want to have a hierarchy, you can cluster them around certain topics, but it's not like this up, middle, or core and not so core processes that I think is so relevant. That's the one aspect of it.
Okay.
The other aspect, which is even worse, that here the actual fundamental thinking about process architecture, what objects to use to display what, is mixed up on the entry map. So the entry map is you go to a portal, you get the home page. Now, if you go to a home page of a company, you may also have this is our portfolio, and you will have maybe some a picture where you say, this is our team. And you will have something else where you say, oh, these are our handbooks, because it's relevant to see it on the top side. So it's a mix and match of everything that maybe somebody will want to have a direct access to is displayed on the home page. But if you go to the sitemap, they will have a very clear indexed structure. So to a certain extent, the maps with these companies, they do not display the actual architecture. But to be honest, I'm with you, everybody believes that is the case, but it's not. It's just a landing page where I try to get the most relevant, let's say, entry points into my process model onto one map. And then if you really take that as the point, you say, okay, that's an argument, because you don't want to say which. But what bugs me most is the mixing of an actual functional process hierarchy and the end-to-end views. So what you explained with the SAP view, they're mixing up fundamentally a structure where we're talking end-to-end, like lead to order or order to cash, where I want to orchestrate processes from different functions with different capabilities, or however you want to, classify the hierarchy there, and you want to compose them in a manner to fulfill the needs of your end-to-end business model. And the model type typically is different. The hierarchy is different. The use case is different. And it's like a higher, let's say, hierarchical level, or a different abstraction level than the actual processes that are functionally decomposed. And that's where, if you have one entry map and you just kind of mix and max everything on there, people are not really understanding the fundamentals of the process architecture. And they start off with the map, they mix it all up, and they never get to understand, fundamentally, I have two different entry points into my processes. One of them is the end-to-end view, that I can go over domains, down to the use cases, and then to the processes. And the other one is a clear hierarchical library of processes. And if you have these clearly organized in folder structures or with artifacts and process models in your repository, no matter what tool you use, and then you say, for the easiness of accessing and communicating, we're going to create one entry map. I could tolerate it, but to be honest, it's always the other way around. And it really is. It's such a struggle to make them understand first fundamentally their architecture, then talk about maps, and not the other way around.
I agree. The one thing I try to tell my clients is that, listen, everything that you document in a BPM platform serves two purposes. There is the one purpose is creation maintenance, and the second purpose is consumption. And those are two very distinctly different use cases that require different structures and different hierarchies. the creation maintenance purpose is done with the process modelers, the experts. And they, I would say, typically prefer a completely functionally decomposed structure. So you go from finance to accounting to accounts payable to verify invoice. I mean, it's very straightforward, it's very simple. It aligns perfectly with the ownership structure, typically. On the consumption side, that's where the end users live, and they typically are much more in favor of an end-to-end type of approach, where you say, well, I'm part of the record-to-record process, so I can more easily find where I actually play a role in the process. And the second thing on that, and I agree with you, is that process landscape or the process house or the process map is nothing else than just a visualization of these are the main building blocks that we have in the organization to make our organization work, but they should not be a combination of the end-to-end hierarchy and the functional hierarchy forced into one picture. I think that's you're basically assaulting reality that way.
Yeah, and what comes with it, that's why I'm a fan of having two entry maps. One of them, the end-to-end view that you can clearly have, according to architecture, drill it down to a certain level where you have like the value chains and the processes and your interfaces to other end-to-end scenarios, and you have a pure functional decomposition, and have these in parallel. And then you can still, nowadays the tools are better. I think the tools have changed. Now you have much more possibilities of let's say having role individual views, and you don't have to have one map where everybody, finance and the functional guys and the IT guys and the business guys, all have to go over one portal, one map. So here people should, go back and say, let's first get our as I said, our hierarchy and the process architecture right. And then we can think about the consumption and our consumers, and then even create whatever. I log in as a procurement end user, and I purely see my relevant processes and even an extract of the process. Maybe I don't want to see the processes anymore, and really think more user-centric on the visualization and the consumption of the processes, and internally have a clear structure. And what happens now, what I see a lot is that, and SAP is actually a good example there. So they build up quite a complex like meta model where they're bringing in all these other best practices and the APQC process model and business capabilities and the scope items, and everything. And the actual hierarchies that are there, they are, let's say, fundamentally, I would say, let's say, modeled in the repository, with open hierarchies. But the tool, the collaboration hub, is how you visualize it in certain maps. And they are also technically, but a lot of tools have the same issue, they are technically disjunct. And so that you're building together some visualization, which may be, lets people assume that there are certain relations or certain hierarchies there that are modeled completely differently in the repository. So and that's super confusing. So there, you're building up this big meta model in your repository, and then you're saying, oh, let's take this and this and this, and let's just, put this into create a map, a diagram with the objects there, like an entry map, and then you publish that, and you say here, and people that go in there, they say, that's our process structure, and you're going, no, that's a view on something that has been put together for you to consume, but this is not fundamentally the actual architecture, and this is not actually the level structure that you have to maintain and understand to be able to keep your database consistent. It's a big challenge, and I think that's where we were talking to Mirko, and he was I remember him also say, that the tools just really haven't really got to the level that they are offering the consumers of processes really an ideal, let's say, experience. It's not the ideal experience. It's still revolving around building up like a modeling, but you would really have to shift, and these static models, the maps that are created, people treat them as if they've been hammered into stone.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it is the map that is there, and because people see it, they say that is our process architecture, and that's when you and my hair
Yeah.
and your hair stands at its end.
Which hair? The one on my chin, maybe.
Yeah, the
Jesus.
one on my.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of those things that creep me out all the time is, and I saw this. I was working with a client last week in Eastern Europe, and they actually called the whole purchasing domain source to settle. And in it by itself, I mean, from sourcing to settling, that spans the entire purchasing domain. So I get where it's coming from, but at the same time, it really tricks people into belief that it's just one big end-to-end process, and then there's like 70 sub-processes in there. I said, listen, guys, first and foremost, source to settle is not an end-to-end process to start with, because it's source to contract. That happens like once or twice a year. And then there is procure to pay or procure to settle. And that happens like 1,000,000 times a year. And you call off on the things that you do in the sourcing side. So there's a disjunction between those two parts of the end-to-end. And furthermore,
I'll just jump in there. I slightly disagree. To be honest, I don't.
Finally.
Because here, I would say if people define domains, and this is for me, this is source to settlement, is for me, it's not a process and it's not a scenario, it's a domain. So it's like this is an end-to-end domain, and the only thing I really define with that is ownership. That's my thinking here. The only thing I say is so I have a process owner that, and when I go a level deeper, then I have to think about the different scenarios. And one of them, and then I'm with you, is actually then the source, let's say contract, because timely, that is disjunct from the call off from the contract to the settlement. And these different, let's say, then end to end. Processes end to end. Then I have to have and it's not one. It can be. I mean, something. So you could have 10 different sourcing of services, of supply chain materials, of whatever. Yeah,
Ross, let me cut in here, because newsflash, I only partly agree. That doesn't happen very often, but still, you said source to settle is a functional domain. Okay. No, sorry. It spans a domain.
It's a domain. It's
a domain. But
it's a domain.
Where I don't really agree is that it's also used for ownership. Because if that was true, then let me ask you a question. If you interview 100 companies in the world and you ask them, where does the accounts payable people report into? Then the answer in 95% of the cases would be, you tell me, finance.
Finance, yeah.
Finance. Source to settle is a purchasing domain. The end-to-end process, let's say procure to settle, contains accounts payable, but the functional domain of purchasing does not contain accounts payable, usually.
Oh.
Usually.
So now what we're talking about is the differentiation between a functional ownership, that's what I say,
and an end-to-end ownership.
And an end-to-end ownership.
Oh, yeah.
And fundamentally, say, in order to cash is a good example. You need to have a functional ownership on, let's say, the logistics, or the goods receipt, or say warehousing. Let's say in general,
the goods issue, the delivery, the shipments.
And then definitely the actual ownership around invoicing is in finance, although operatively in the order to cash process is executed by somehow in that
accounts
chain.
receivable typically.
Yeah, and then but the orchestration of these, say, the sales, the logistics, and the finance around the accounts receivables, that orchestration, you need an ownership. And if this is one person, or if it's a gremium, you need an end-to-end ownership. That's also so similar to your map, mixing like these functional decomposition of the end-to-end domains. You have the same challenge on the ownership level. That there is, I think, a fundamental difference between orchestrating and setting up, let's say, ownership on end-to-end, where people have to collaborate and agree across the functions, and the actual then detailed, let's say, ownership over a certain, I would say, process cluster, of accounts payables and accounts receivables and processes, which are then a service provided in the context of the source to contract or the contractor to settlement or the order to cash. Yeah?
So then the question becomes, and that's really interesting, and now unfortunately I do agree with you again. At the moment that you say I have a functional domain called purchasing, which typically does not contain the accounts payable part, but I have an end-to-end process for procure to pay that does contain accounts payable, who is the owner for the end-to-end process? And my typical rule of thumb is that the function that has the biggest controlling impact on the end-to-end is typically the one that delivers the owner, which for procure to pay would be the, let's say, the purchase order creation stage, because that drives everything else in that whole process. So that would leave typically a purchasing role being the end-to-end owner for procure to pay.
Yeah, establishing this end-to-end ownership is a
tricky thing.
I think as a rule of thumb, you would go in that direction. But I mean, ultimately, what we've done depending on big organization, small organization, very centralized organization, decentralized organization, also depending on the domain, if it's purchasing or sales, we typically finish up having and we've talked about this hybrid centralized decentralized ownership topic anyway.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So what you're having so the combination of, say, trying to set up a hybrid ownership on end to end, and in combination with something as complex as order to cash, where you have sales, logistics, and finance. I said, what is dominating there? I said, well, it depends. Is it more the sales driving the way this order to cash is set up, or is it for order to cash? Is it more the actual the order fulfillment, logistics, and stuff? And here, a lot of the times we see the following: either we have a top-down decision where say, this is the guy that I trust, and he's gonna do this, and he or she, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Slap me there. Is the person that keeps this together. He gets the mandate, she gets the mandate to take up the objective and drive it into the team, to get things done. So it really is something that is really established on a high. But what we have a lot of the time is that we are talking more about a gremium of people, where, and somebody gets the facilitating, moderating role, and is a bit of the, let's say, the person that talks to the top level management is the communicator, but you have representatives of finance and logistics and sales from the regions coming in. So various functional owners coming in to discuss actually the design, the approval of the overall then design. And you can this can manifest itself in different organizational forms. So you can have somebody like a process owner that is more like the facilitator of this discussion and cross checks with all the, let's say, relevant stakeholders in the business to align and come up with with process design and changes that are acceptable for all, or for most of them, or which is then accepted by the top dog, who then says, okay, that's how we're going to do it. But that's like we're going down a topic around how to establish ownership and how you can play it depending on the organization. But principally, but you get the point that, first of all, there is a big difference between let's say you said lead to cash, like more the end-to-end oriented hierarchy and the ownership attached to that, versus I think, to be looked at separately, the very strict hierarchical decomposition of processes, for the sake of, say, also the QM guys love that. The auditors love it. They want to see where is the IT guys love it as well, because first of all, foremost, they say, what's my shopping list of processes and capabilities that we need for applications? And it's like it's a very nice. It looks like we got the world in order. And then you say, okay, and then real life kicks in, and then you go to the end to end, and that's where, on an alignment, on the variations, on the requirement side, let's say the end-to-end is the real world. That's where it has the real world impacts. And that's why I like to distinguish these views, because from a business perspective, as you said, also the consumer perspective, I think the end-to-end is more relevant. Bottom line. That's where you impact the bottom line.
But now, so here's a reality check. If I have 1,500 processes in an organization, I might only have like 8 critical end-to-ends. And I totally agree with you. Those typically have the biggest impact. And they are the usual suspects as well. But you need to manage the rest of the processes as well. And that's why I believe, and we don't disagree on this, you need to have that purely functional decomposed structure so you can easily create and maintain your processes. And you need an end-to-end structure to make sure that everybody understands how the most important processes are actually taking place in sequence. And just to get back to one of those other points, there's another way to solve this end-to-end ownership riddle, because that's what I worked in the chemical manufacturing industry for a long time, as you know. This is the period that we've met first. We actually moved the accounts payable people from finance into procurement, and then the whole procure-to-pay process was simply under the flag of procurement anyway. And by the way, that also works.
The cool thing about that is actually, I suppose, that works in a centralized,
it was a shared service approach.
Coming like a shared service approach is that you're rebuilding or you're restructuring your organization along the processes. So you're doing more like a line organization. And ultimately, I think that is something where astonishingly the actual, the pure hierarchical, the organization of companies is very often not aligned according to their core end-to-end processes. It seems to be something where they take decisions on, let's create an entity here, let's create a limited company there for tax reasons, that let's just I need to have a hierarchical level, somebody report to somebody for the sake of approving their holidays. And you look at it, it says, wow, can't you streamline that? And said, well, what would be the criteria to streamline it? Your processes?
Yeah, exactly.
maybe, and it's crazy sometimes. You say, yeah, but that seems to be, that's something we'd have to talk to somebody who comes more from that field.
Yeah,
and say,
of course.
What is actually stopping you from being much more, let's say, process oriented in the way you organize your teams and your hierarchical organization, your lines of reporting.
So Russell, we need to find a guest on organizational theory to have a chat with us on this.
Yeah, that would be great.
On how to build organizations and how to structure them. Because what I very often say to my clients as well is every organization has a strategy. Every strategy is typically translated into an operating model. Operating model contains typically always one component that is called either processes or way of working. And then you start to build up your repository of processes. But there are more components to an operating model that might play a role. One of them is, of course, the organization. How do you structure your organization? It's not something that we need to go into now, but it's a very interesting topic that we might want to touch upon with a guest in that. So let's do a shout out to people. If you know somebody who has a very good understanding of how organizations are being built up and that relation to processes, we would like to have a chat with you on the podcast.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea. And while we're on that subject, we need to start wrapping this up because I think we've confused the hell out of the most people right now. And so if we have a few listeners left, then we need to say bye to them. It was a very refreshing one, Russell, I have to say. I like to be sometimes in agreeable disagreement with you. That doesn't happen all too often. So thank you for that today.
Yes, and travel safe. And
you too.
Give your family a hug when you get back home.
Oh, I will. And we'll talk again soon, Russell.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.